The vast, unforgiving expanses of the North African desert became a crucible for tank warfare during World War II. This arena tested the mettle of every machine and every man thrown into the conflict. Among the Iron Giants and formidable tank destroyers, there arrived a tank that seemed utterly misplaced. It was lightly armored, thinly protected against the increasing power of German anti-tank weaponry. Its main gun was modest, a 37mm cannon that quickly proved insufficient against the frontal glacis of a Panzer IV. Wehrmacht engineers, the masters of German armor design, looked at captured models and often scoffed. They saw a vulnerable target, a machine built with the speed of a race car but the protection of a tin can. Their primary tanks were heavier, their anti-tank guns more devastating, and their entire doctrine was built upon superior firepower and thick, sloped armor. They assumed that this small, quick American contribution would be nothing more than a fleeting casualty of the desert's brutal engagements. Yet, this small, overlooked machine, the M3 Stuart light tank, defied every expectation set by its critics. The engineers' laughter was premature, a fatal misjudgment of the tank's singular, redeeming quality. That quality was an explosive, unparalleled velocity, the kind of sheer speed that fundamentally changed the rules of engagement for an entire unit. It was not designed to stand and fight the German behemoths, a task for which it was woefully ill-equipped. Instead, the Stuart was a master of evasion, a ghost that was there one moment and gone the next, an armored blur. This speed was not merely a specification on a blueprint, it became the Stuart's de facto armor. It proved to be a defense more effective than any steel plate that Detroit could weld onto its hull. The tank's velocity allowed it to execute maneuvers that were impossible for its heavier, slower counterparts. It could scout with impunity, race past entrenched positions, and most importantly, escape the lethal kill zones of a German ambush before the anti-tank gunners even had a chance to reload. The title of a slow, doomed machine was shattered on the desert sands. The Stuart earned its legendary status because, when confronted with inevitable disaster, it did the one thing no one thought possible: it outran every single ambush. The M3 Stuart tank's development was deeply rooted in the American military's pre-war concept of armored mobility. Before the realities of European blitzkrieg settled in, U.S. Army doctrine still favored fast, cavalry-style tanks for scouting and exploiting breakthroughs. The design team in the late 1930s prioritized a balance between decent firepower, adequate protection for its time, and a high-speed profile. The goal was a vehicle that could keep pace with motorized infantry and effectively screen larger, slower formations. It was a tank of compromise, as all light tanks must be, but its core strength lay beneath its modest hull. Crucially, the Stuart was powered by the Continental W-670-9A radial engine, an engine originally designed for aircraft. This choice was unconventional for a ground vehicle but provided an astonishing power-to-weight ratio for the 14-ton tank. The radial engine was a compact powerhouse, delivering a reliable 250 horsepower that propelled the small machine to speeds exceeding 36 miles per hour on roads. In the challenging, uneven terrain of the desert, this top speed translated into unparalleled operational agility and an incredible rate of acceleration. The production process itself was a marvel of American industry, emphasizing mass and efficiency. The Stuart was one of the first tanks to feature all-around applique armor, a design intended to maximize protection without a complete overhaul. Its simple, riveted hull construction made it relatively easy to manufacture in the rapidly expanding American factories. It was quickly adopted and shipped overseas under the Lend-Lease Act, becoming a vital lifeline for Allied forces, especially the British. The tank's early commitment to the British Eighth Army in North Africa ensured it would be battle-tested immediately. They affectionately nicknamed it the Honey for its smooth and reliable driving characteristics, a testament to its mechanical soundness. This smooth ride and high engine performance were direct consequences of the engineers focusing on mobility as a primary requirement. The Stuart, therefore, was not a failed attempt at a medium tank, it was a highly successful realization of a light, fast reconnaissance vehicle. It was a design that valued momentum and maneuverability over the sheer brute force of heavy armor and large-caliber weapons. German armor doctrine in the early war years was a reflection of their incredible battlefield success, superior weapons, thick armor, and coordinated blitzkrieg tactics. Their initial encounter with the M3 Stuart was colored by a profound sense of technological superiority. The Wehrmacht engineers and tank crews had already transitioned to tanks with larger cannons and formidable armor like the early Panzer IVs and the emerging Tiger program. They viewed the Stuart's 37mm gun as a historical relic, a weapon utterly incapable of penetrating their armored units beyond point-blank range on the sides. The Stuart's vertical, riveted armor, even with applique plating, seemed laughable compared to the sloped, welded design of German tanks. Captured Stuarts were often subjected to meticulous inspections by German technical intelligence teams. These teams consistently reported the tank's deficiencies in armor thickness and main armament. The consensus within the Wehrmacht was that the Stuart was suitable only for the most light-duty reconnaissance or pursuit against retreating, disorganized infantry. It was certainly not considered a threat to a prepared anti-tank position or a mainline German armored unit. German field manuals and training materials, in some instances, even treated the Stuart with a degree of dismissiveness. They taught their anti-tank gunners to treat it as a secondary priority compared to the heavier British or Soviet tanks they were beginning to face. This condescending view led to tactical overconfidence on the part of German ambush commanders. They focused their efforts on creating traps that would guarantee a kill on a tank of average speed and maneuverability. They positioned their Pak-38 anti-tank guns to target slow-moving columns, calculating for a tank's expected traverse rate. They failed to factor in the radical acceleration and turning circle of the Stuart. The engineers, focused on the weight and caliber race, overlooked the psychological and tactical impact of sheer, unexpected velocity. They assumed that any tank, regardless of its speed, would be constrained by the difficult desert terrain, forcing it to crawl. This hubris, based on quantifiable metrics like armor and gun size, ultimately became a tactical vulnerability. The German contempt for the Stuart specifications masked a significant blind spot regarding its practical combat application. The M3 Stuart first tasted serious combat with the British Eighth Army during the arduous campaigns in North Africa. It was immediately thrown into the maelstrom of Operation Crusader in late 1941, a major offensive to relieve the besieged city of Tobruk. The British forces had a desperate need for tanks, and the Stuarts arrived as a crucial, if not entirely perfect, reinforcement. The battles were characterized by sweeping maneuvers across the desert, long columns of vehicles, and sudden, violent engagements. It was here that the limitations of the Stuart were first painfully exposed to its Allied crews. Their 37mm guns were largely ineffective against the frontal armor of the Panzer III and Panzer IV, the backbone of Rommel's Afrika Korps. Stuart crews quickly learned the hard truth of their tanks' role. They were hunters of soft targets and reconnaissance specialists, not tank killers. The losses mounted during head-to-head engagements, reinforcing the German view of the tank as a lightweight. However, the Desert War also provided the perfect stage for the Stuart's one true gift to shine through. The flat, open terrain allowed the radial engine to reach and maintain its high operational speeds for extended periods. Unlike the muddy fields of the Eastern Front, the desert permitted a high-speed, tactical agility that was revolutionary. British and Commonwealth commanders began to adapt their tactics to the Stuart's unique characteristics. They stopped using the M3s as main battle tanks and instead assigned them to the vital roles of scouting and screening. The Stuart became invaluable for its ability to dash ahead of the main force, identify enemy positions, and swiftly report back. This information asymmetry was critical in the rapidly changing operational landscape of the desert. The tank's crews learned to hit and run, using their speed to harass the enemy's flanks and quickly withdraw before a counterattack could materialize. This new, dynamic doctrine was born out of necessity but redefined the purpose of the light tank on the modern battlefield. The M3 Stuart was perpetually judged against the wrong standard, the benchmark set by the medium and heavy tanks of the Wehrmacht. Its nominal armor thickness ranged from 12 to 51 mm, a protection level that became increasingly obsolete as the war progressed. The most common German anti-tank gun in the desert, the 50 mm Pak 38, could slice through the Stuart's frontal armor with relative ease. A well-aimed shot, even from a decent distance, meant almost certain penetration and devastation for the crew. This vulnerability was not a design flaw, it was a consequence of a doctrinal choice to prioritize mobility. The tank's primary armament, the 37 mm M5 or M6 cannon, was a rapid-fire weapon but lacked the sheer kinetic energy needed to defeat heavy armor. It could effectively knock out armored cars, soft-skin vehicles, and infantry positions, but against a tank, its rounds often merely bounced off. This weakness led to the myth of the Stuart as a completely ineffective combat vehicle. The myth stated that the Stuart was a death trap, an embarrassment to American production, and a useless burden on Allied forces. But this perspective missed the critical, hidden function that the tank actually performed. The Stuart's value was not in its capacity to take a hit, but in its unparalleled ability to avoid being hit in the first place. Its true armor was the distance it could cover in seconds, the sudden turn it could execute, and the plume of dust that obscured its escape. The tank was designed for intelligence gathering, for probing attacks, and for maintaining operational tempo. It was a machine that traded static protection for dynamic survival, a trade that often resulted in a lower crew casualty rate than its more heavily armored counterparts. The crews who mastered the Stuart understood this trade-off implicitly and changed their mindset accordingly. They fought with their engine, not just their gun, using every ounce of their vehicle's speed to stay alive and complete their mission. The legend of the Stuart is not one of great duels but one of near misses, incredible evasions, and tactical longevity under fire. The M3 Stuart speed was its most formidable and often underestimated weapon system, the true source of its survival. The Continental radial engine, with its reliable power output, was the heart of this operational advantage. Its responsive controls and excellent suspension system allowed the Stuart to traverse the difficult desert terrain at a speed that truly shocked its enemies. The tank's low weight contributed directly to its phenomenal acceleration, letting it reach top speed faster than virtually any other tank on the field. This velocity was crucial in maintaining the element of surprise, a concept often lost in the noise of heavy tank warfare. A Stuart could appear on a flank, conduct a rapid-fire burst against a German supply convoy, and vanish over the horizon before a full response could be coordinated. German anti-tank gunners relied heavily on calculated lead and the assumption of a relatively consistent target speed. The Stuart's ability to suddenly accelerate, decelerate, and change direction with dizzying speed completely broke these firing solutions. A shot that was perfectly lined up one moment would fly harmlessly behind the tank the next, thanks to a sudden, high-speed maneuver. The psychological impact of facing such a fast, elusive target was demoralizing for the enemy. It created a pervasive sense of frustration among German anti-tank crews, who felt they were constantly chasing a phantom. The speed also dramatically expanded the Stuart's operational range and tactical reach. It could quickly bridge large distances to support a beleaguered unit or to exploit a small crack in the enemy's defensive line. No other tank of the early war period possessed this potent combination of armor, firepower, and sheer, raw velocity. This defining characteristic transformed the Stuart from a lightly armed scout into an invaluable asset on the operational battlefield. The engine noise became the harbinger of a quick strike or a timely escape, a sound that German forces learned to respect and eventually fear. The German anti-tank ambush was a well-honed, terrifyingly effective tactical art during the desert campaigns. Their engineers and anti-tank specialists utilized the terrain to set up kill zones, often in wadis, passes, or around crucial logistical choke points. The tactic relied on perfect camouflage, patient waiting, and the devastating first shot from a powerful anti-tank gun like the 50mm or, later, the 75mm Pak-40. The guns were positioned for interlocking fields of fire, ensuring that any tank that survived the first hit would immediately be caught in the crossfire of another. German commanders calculated the average speed of Allied tank columns, predicting where a vehicle would be in relation to their gun sights when the order to fire was given. They specialized in creating a sense of false security, letting reconnaissance elements pass before springing the trap on the main, slower armored body. The objective was to immobilize the lead tank first, effectively blocking the road for those behind it. The rest of the column would then become stationary, easy targets for the concealed German guns. This tactical model worked perfectly against the M3 Lee or the early M for Sherman tanks, which relied on their armor to survive. The slower, heavier tanks, once engaged, had limited options for escape, often having to fight a fixed-position battle. This was the trap that the Wehrmacht engineers fully expected the light, vulnerable Stuart to fall into and be summarily destroyed. They failed to consider that the Stuart would not stop to engage the hidden positions. They did not account for a tank that could enter the kill zone and, in the brief window between the first shot and the reloading of the gun, simply accelerate out of the danger. The precision and planning of the German ambush were predicated on a tank's physical limitations. The Stuart had a physical limitation, yes, but it was a limitation of its protection, not its speed. Its raw velocity was the variable that completely ruined the mathematical certainty of the German trap. Imagine the deafening, sudden roar of an anti-tank round cutting the silence of the desert, the projectile striking the ground mere feet from the Stuart's hull. This was the opening sequence of countless life-or-death encounters for Stuart crews. The moment the German gun fired, the trap was sprung, and for any other tank, the battle was effectively lost. But for the Stuart, the first shot was the cue for the most critical action, maximum acceleration. The Stuart's commander would scream the order to the driver, and the radial engine, already running hot, would unleash its full explosive power. The tank would lurch forward or swerve violently, kicking up an enormous plume of dust and sand behind it. This cloud of dust was the first layer of its defense, instantly obscuring the tank from the gunners attempting a follow-up shot. The driver, often a master of high-speed, off-road maneuvering, would not drive in a predictable straight line toward cover. Instead, they would execute a series of high-speed, sharp, jinking turns, using the tank's short wheelbase to their advantage. These evasive maneuvers ensured that the German second and third shots, fired in haste and frustration, would miss their mark. The Germans, trained to track a target, found their aim compromised by the Stuart's erratic and incredible velocity. The tank was simply moving too fast, changing direction too often, and disappearing into the created dust cloud too quickly. It was a race of milliseconds between the gunner reloading his breech and the Stuart reaching the safety of a dune or a ridge line. In many accounts, Stuart crews described feeling the blast of near misses, the sting of shrapnel against their light armor, but they kept pushing the engine to its limit. They were not fighting, they were running, and in this context, running was the only path to victory and survival. The speed of the Stuart meant that the meticulously planned ambush, meant to secure an immediate kill, was instead transformed into a humiliating, frustrating near miss. The Wehrmacht engineers were a methodical and highly capable group, constantly seeking to improve and refine their armored vehicles and anti-tank methods. Their shock at the Stuart was not a reaction to its firepower, which they correctly judged as weak, but to its frustrating tactical resilience. Initial combat reports often contained puzzled notations from field commanders concerning the number of times the Stuart tanks successfully disengaged from ambushes. The reports detailed near misses, perfectly aimed shots that failed to connect, and vehicles that simply disappeared from the kill zone in a burst of speed. German technical teams were sent out to study the wrecks of Stuarts that were successfully destroyed to understand this perplexing ability to evade fire. They would measure the chassis, analyze the engine's power-to-weight ratio, and review the suspension system. It was in this meticulous, after-action analysis that the true significance of the Stuart's high-speed design became undeniably clear. The engineers realized the tank was not merely fast, it was strategically too fast for their current anti-tank doctrine. Their firing tables and target tracking methods were calibrated for the speed and inertia of heavier tanks. The Stuart's lightweight and powerful engine allowed it to accelerate and traverse terrain in ways that broke the established tactical rules. The realization settled in that they had laughed at the wrong thing. They should not have mocked the armor, which was an honest reflection of its class, but respected the mobility, which was world-class. This shock directly contributed to a strategic reassessment within the German command structure. They began to alter their anti-tank placement, positioning their guns for faster reaction times and developing new, more complex ambush methods. However, the Stuart had already established its reputation as the slipperiest opponent on the desert battlefield, a tank that had turned its greatest perceived weakness into an overwhelming tactical strength. As the war progressed and heavier, better-armed tanks like the M4 Sherman arrived, the M3 Stuart's role began a natural and vital evolution. It was definitively moved away from frontline, close-quarters tank fighting, a mission for which it was ill-suited. The Stuart was formally and effectively transitioned into the dedicated role of armored reconnaissance and scouting. This new specialization perfectly aligned with its core strengths of speed, agility, and mechanical reliability. A long column of heavy armor required eyes and ears far ahead, to identify enemy movements and potential ambush sites. The Stuart, with its exceptional cross-country performance, was perfectly suited to this dangerous, solitary task. It could race ahead of the main force, conduct a high-speed survey of the terrain, and draw enemy fire to reveal hidden positions. If engaged by superior forces, the Stuart did not have to stand its ground. Its primary mission was to survive and report. Its phenomenal speed ensured that it could reliably execute this peek-and-run strategy, bringing back vital intelligence that saved countless lives in the following column. This reconnaissance role was not glamorous, but it was foundational to Allied success in movement and maneuver warfare. The information gathered by a single Stuart crew could determine the success or failure of an entire divisional advance. Its high speed meant it could relay information back to the main force much faster than any slower tank or traditional armored car. The Stuart often served as a forward observation post, directing artillery fire onto identified German positions from a safe, yet close, distance. It was an indispensable asset for commanders, providing the clarity needed to navigate the chaotic and often confusing battlefield. The tank became the eyes of the army, a small, fast guardian whose value was measured not in the tanks it destroyed, but in the threats it successfully identified and helped avoid. The often overlooked secret to the M3 Stuart's longevity and tactical success was its remarkable logistical footprint and mechanical dependability. American mass production techniques ensured that spare parts were standardized and plentiful across all theaters of operation. The Stuart's simpler design, especially its reliable radial engine, made it vastly easier for field mechanics to maintain and repair. German tanks, in stark contrast, were often over-engineered, complex machines that required specialized tools and significant time for major repairs. A broken track or a damaged engine on a German Panzer could mean days of delay and a reliance on heavy recovery vehicles. A Stuart could frequently be repaired and returned to the fight in a matter of hours, a crucial difference in a fast-moving campaign. Its reliability meant that the Stuart's operational readiness rate was consistently higher than many of its German rivals. The tank's relatively light weight also meant it consumed less fuel, a critical consideration for extended operations across the vast, supply-starved desert. This logistical resilience made it a favorite among support staff and commanders who needed a dependable workhorse. The reliability of the engine was particularly important, as any mechanical failure in a reconnaissance role was often fatal. The tank crews needed absolute confidence that when they pushed the accelerator to escape an ambush, the engine would not cough or die. The Stuart's engine was a guarantor of survival, a testament to robust American engineering and manufacturing. This mechanical dependability ensured that the speed advantage was always available, always ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The ease of maintenance meant that more Stuarts were available on any given day for scouting, screening, and, most importantly, evading the enemy. The Stuart was a complete package of speed and stamina, a tank that could run fast and run long, proving its worth far beyond the superficial metrics of armor and armament. The legacy of the M3 Stuart is a powerful lesson in military design and the crucial role of speed in modern warfare. It teaches us that superior firepower is not the only path to battlefield dominance or, more importantly, survival. The Stuart's success was not an accident. It was the direct result of a design philosophy that embraced mobility as a weapon. It was a tank that forced the enemy to fundamentally change their anti-tank tactics, a rare feat for a machine of its size. The laughter of the Wehrmacht engineers died down as their ambushes failed and their carefully laid traps were rendered useless. They realized that a fast, elusive threat is often more disruptive to operational planning than a slow, heavily armored one. The Stuart's enduring contribution was its perfect execution of the armored reconnaissance mission, a task that requires survival as its first and most important component. It defined the doctrine of using speed to gather intelligence, to exploit breakthroughs, and to save itself from otherwise catastrophic encounters. The Stuarts served on every major front of the war, from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific, demonstrating its versatile and robust nature. It was a bridge, a necessary light tank that carried the Allied forces through the dark, early days of the war until heavier, more powerful machines could be developed. The Stuarts' crews became masters of the high-speed maneuver, relying on their vehicle's velocity as their only true guarantee of making it home. They were the eyes that guided the army and the ghosts that haunted the German ambush sites. The M3 Stuart, the little tank the engineers laughed at, ultimately proved that the fastest way to win is not always to outgun the enemy, but sometimes, simply to outrun them. Its story is a timeless reminder that in warfare, speed and agility can be the ultimate, defining factors of survival and success.